It was. Oh, you started recording, huh? Okay. I just want to double check here the calendar. Um, yeah, so disappearance of Ramananda Rai, and it's also the appearance of Vrindavan Das Thakur next week. Um, so yeah. And also it was the disappearance of Bhakti Sranga Goswami Maharaj last week. Very dear godbrother Srila Sridhar Maharaj. So, so we could have some remembrance, I think. Unless anyone here has some particular request for today, we can cover that. And welcome Ramananda Prabhu from San Jose. Dandavad Prabhu, good to see you. So yes, Ramananda Rai, very important, important leader of our Sampradaya. He is Vishaka Saki in Krishna Lila. So Lalita Vishaka, right? Lalita appears as Swarup Damodar, and Vishaka Saki appears as Ramananda Rai. And so naturally they have a very close and very intimate relationship with Mahaprabhu. And particularly in Mahaprabhu's last phase, in the last phase of his pastimes in this world, when Mahaprabhu's pastimes have these different phases to them, right? That he was in this world for 48 years. And welcome, Krishna Lalana. um,
Morning.
so, Dhanava, good morning. So originally, Mahaprabhu spent the first half of his life, half of his pastimes in Navadvip, right? He was in this world 48 years. The first 24, he was in Navadvip, living his Grihasta Leela and also early childhood Leela as Nimai of Nadia. And then 24, he took sannyas and he moved to Puri at the request of his mother, settled there. And then the next phase was 12 years. 12 years he was traveling and preaching throughout India, based in Puri. And then the last 12 years, up until his departure from this world, and there was another phase, and that was when he withdrew, right? And, Mahaprabhu came to this world with this twofold purpose, right? One was covering the public duty of spreading the holy name, right? Establishing the Yuga Dharma of Harinam Sankirtan. And that is actually the role of what normally Vishnu avatar. Normally Mahaprabhu is appearing as an avatar of Lord Vishnu. And so he descends to spread this, Dharma samstap. This is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. It comes to establish the Dharma. But of course, as we know, this Mahaprabhu who appears in this age, he is very unique, very special. He is non-different from Swayam Bhagavan Krishna, the original Krishna of Vrindavan. And so when he comes, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj describes this all very beautifully in his Saraswata Arati, how these two purposes came together, right? It happened that it was the time for the Yuga avatar to come, but also the Lord was also feeling curious. And Sri Krishna Vrindavan, he wanted to explore the heart of his beloved Radharani. And so simultaneously, he decides to descend, taking her mood, taking her heart, and comes to explore that, right? To celebrate her glories and also to get some taste of what she is tasting, of his own sweetness that he cannot taste himself, right? And so Mahaprabhu initially fulfills his public duty, and then in this last 12 years of his life, then he takes the time to fulfill his own desire, his inner desire, to explore the mood of Radharani. And so there's this big shift that takes place in those last 12 years. And, it's like quite a dramatic shift, actually. Mahaprabhu pretty much dismisses Nityananda Prabhu because Nityananda Prabhu's mood is not exactly compatible with this new um, phase in his pastimes, right? Nityananda Prabhu, his relationship is in Sakya Vatsalya, right? Friendship and also somewhat guardian mood. And Mahaprabhu's going into this new phase to explore the mood of Madhura Rasa, amorous love, and particularly what is in the heart of Radharani. And so Mahaprabhu sends Nityananda Prabhu to Navadvip, to Bengal, to focus on preaching there. And then simultaneously, then his relationship with Sri Damodar and Rāmānanda Rāy, that suddenly becomes more of a focal point, right? Because they, as we said, right, they are originally, well, originally is not the right word, but they are in Krishna Lila, they have this role as girlfriends of Radharani. They are attendants of Radharani, the most intimate. And so they are the ones who can perfectly understand all of her moods and know how to support her, help her enhance her feelings or help subdue feelings according to necessity. And so they come in a lot closer that time. And there's one beautiful verse that Gurudev liked to quote, that how, day and night, Mahaprabhu would be in their company, and Sri Damodar used to sing very beautifully, sing verses, and Mahaprabhu, Rāmānanda Rāy used to read different sections of the scriptures, and he was particularly expert in dramas, we hear, like in composing dramas and something like that, And so he used to also read different things from Mahaprabhu, and they would give him nourishment in this way. And then the third person who also became very prominent this time is Gadadhar Pandit. Gadadhar Pandit, who is an is a form of Radharani and Gaura Lila. Um, then Gadadhar Pandit also, he was very close with Mahaprabhu at this time, because of course, who can better understand Mahaprabhu than him at that time, right? So these three, Rāmānanda Rāy, Sri Damodar, and Gadadhar Pandit, they were like Mahaprabhu's principal associates in that last phase, because no one could really understand him, at that time, because he pretty much went into madness, went into a state of divine madness. And so, you know, he wasn't really in a condition to be meeting and speaking with the general devotees. And, we hear in the night, sometimes he would try to run away, and sometimes he was successful, although it's a mystery how, and Gurudev mentioned that, like how did Mahaprabhu manage, because they had him locked for his own protection. They had him locked in that little room. Some of you have seen the Gambhir, right, in Puri,
I
tiny
have
little.
seen that room long ago. Yeah, I've been.
Mm, mm.
Yeah, it's small room. Yeah,
Yeah, small room, and it's locked, and there were guards, outside watching over him. But by his mystic power, he managed to escape. And, he would, he became a liability to his own self. When he saw the ocean, he would think it was the Jamuna, and he would go to jump in. If he saw a mountain, or hill, he would think it's Govardhan. And so he was seeing Vrindavan everywhere. And so Ramananda Rai, he's a very interesting example in Mahaprabhu's Leela because, we see different types of devotees, right? Different moods in the devotees. And I was discussing with Ananda Moy, our Japanese god sister here a few days ago, and she sometimes expresses frustration because, often the devotees of Krishna aren't so successful in their material life, shall we say. Or not, many are, not so organized in that department. And so she was expressing some frustration. And I told her, maybe it's just supposed to be like that. Maybe that's just not natural, and I mentioned the example of Shivananda Sain, right? Shivananda Sain, who's mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita. He's a leading Gaudiya Vaishnava from Bengal, and he's a well-to-do, wealthy Vaishnava and very organized, very set up in the world, and we see on different occasions when Mahaprabhu um, requests him like to help take care of the other devotees, and this Vaishnava, he doesn't know how to manage his money, and whenever he gets any money, he spends it for the service of Krishna, so he can't take care of his family properly. You please help him out, and like this, and Mahaprabhu asks him to take care of the Bengali Vaishnavas when they come as a group for the Rath Yatra to Puri, and so on. So Ramananda Rai, he's actually one of those. Right? There's also Punjarik Vidyanidhi. He's also very wealthy Vaishnava. Um, and then Ramananda Rai is also of that type. We see other examples, right? There's Gadadhar Pandit, who has a mood of extreme abnegation, extreme renunciation. Um, and what to speak of the Goswamis, of Vrindavan, how extreme they live, living under trees, just, you know, eating stale, dried chapatis, that they would save for a week and then dry in the sun. And, you know, so we see that, and that's normally what we think of when we think of, you know, how a Vaishnava will live, or what renunciation means. But we see in these other examples, right, that actually real renunciation is something internal, right? And that won't necessarily reflect in how you appear in the world, right? But the Vaishnava may be surrounded by the opulence of Krishna, we can say it like that. But they are seeing that as Krishna's property, using that in the service of Krishna, and they don't have any selfish view on that wealth that surrounds them, or various material, um, you know, pleasures and so on. They don't see that as for their own, right? And so Ramananda Rai is actually quite an extreme example of this. And there's that one story that's told in Chaitanya Charitamrita, right? That Ramananda Rai, there was that Brahmin, right? Pradyumna Mishra, that was his name, Pradyumna Mishra. He had come to Mahaprabhu in Puri and asked him, to please bless him with some teachings. He wanted to hear some Harikatha from Mahaprabhu. And Mahaprabhu told him, whatever I know about Krishna, I've heard from Ramananda Rai, right? And, and this takes us back to the first meeting that Mahaprabhu had with Ramananda Rai, right? And that was when that was in South India, Kabur, right? That was the name of this little town, Kabur. And that was when, Mahaprabhu was traveling in South India, and Ramananda Rai at that time was posted as like the ruler of that region. It was under the control of Orissa at that time. And so he was coming like as a delegate from Orissa under the king of Orissa, but practically like a king himself, you know. And so that was when they first met by the arrangement of Yogamaya, and they had that meeting and conversation, which is now known as the Rāmānanda Samvad, right? The conversation with Rāmānanda Rāy. So that was their first meeting. And in that meeting, you know, Mahaprabhu actually put himself in the position of the student, right? Normally, Mahaprabhu would be in the position of instruction, right? In the case of Sanatan Shiksha and Rupa Shiksha, when Mahaprabhu gives instruction to Rupa and Sanatan. And naturally, Mahaprabhu is in the position of the instructor. And there are a few other cases like that too. But in the case of Rāmānanda Rāy, Mahaprabhu puts himself in the position of the student. So that also tells you something about the importance of Rāmānanda Rāy's position. And so Mahaprabhu is inquiring, Rāmānanda Rāy is responding. Then fast forward, right? Rāmānanda Rāy. Okay, very nice. Thank you, Nanda Krishna. So, you know, so Rāmānanda Rāy then decides to shift and be based in Puri so we can have Mahaprabhu's association more closely. And so then there's this incident. Rāmānanda Rāy is staying in Puri, and this Brahmin, Pradyumna Mishra, comes to Mahaprabhu, please tell me about Krishna. And Mahaprabhu tells him, whatever I know about Krishna, I learned from Rāmānanda Rāy. So you please go to Rāmānanda Rāy. And then, so Pradyumna Mishra goes to meet with Rāmānanda Rāy. Oh, welcome, Bimal Krishna Prabhu. Happy you can join us. Ishtadevaka. So Pradyumna Mishra goes to the residence of Rāmānanda Rāy. And the attendant there, as we said, right, Rāmānanda Rāy is a wealthy Vaishnava. And so he has some servants there, and they tell Pradyumna, oh, he's a little busy right now. Can you wait? And Pradyumna Mishra, he's waiting, but then he happens to see Rāmānanda Rāy, and he's training these dancing girls, right? They're called Devadasis, right? Devadasis, if I remember correctly, Devadasis. And there are these girls who are especially trained to dance and perform for Jagannath, right? Which is, you know, that's actually something that I think about sometimes, that previously entertainment was something that was offered to the Lord. And yeah, and now, yeah, it's just an interesting indication of like how society has changed so much, you know. Yeah. We yeah. Well, anyway, maybe we won't go down that tangent. But yeah, previously, dance, song, theater, all these things were things that were offered to the Lord. And maybe some people would see it and get some like prasadam like that, you know. But it's for the Lord's pleasure. So anyhow, Ramananda Rai, right, and I mentioned before, he was particularly expert in drama. And so he was training these girls. But he's also like showing them like how to hold their posture in different ways, how to hold different poses. And in the course of that, he was touching them in some intimate places. And Pradyumna Mishra saw that, and he was naturally shocked and disturbed, and thinking that, you know, how could Mahaprabhu send me to him? What is he doing? You know, what kind of a Vaishnava is this? And and so he goes back to Mahaprabhu the next day, and Mahaprabhu like asks him, "Oh, so what happened? Did you visit with Ramananda?" And Pradyumna says, "Well, I mean, to be honest, I was a little disturbed. I went to see him and I saw this whole scene." And Mahaprabhu told him, don't be deceived. Ramananda Rai, he is on another level. And he says there's Ek Ramananda. There's one Ramananda. No one is like him. And he says, even I, Mahaprabhu says, even I can become disturbed. If I hear the name of a woman, even I can become disturbed. But Ramananda, he is on another level. So don't be fooled. Understand he has this deep Vaishnava nature. And I think he refers to him as having an aprakrita body, a transcendental form, So, you don't be deceived, right? You go back and you hear from him. And so, of course, this is something that could be interpreted in a dangerous way. But the principle is there, right? That if someone is truly fixed in divine consciousness, then they can move in any type of way, but not to be imitated, right? Not to be imitated. But that is who Ramananda is, right? He has this very unique and special position. And so Pradyumna Mishra goes back to Ramananda Rai, and then they're talking. He's hearing day and night in ecstasy. Ramananda Rai is delivering such wonderful discourses. And Pradyumna Mishra is very, very joyful to hear that. So this is Ramananda Rai. And Gurudev also mentioned, that, Ramananda Rai, he had a very, strong nature. And after Mahaprabhu left, he took on the responsibility to give support to all of the Vaishnavas, Mahaprabhu's devotees, because not everyone could do that. Srup Damodar, he had, we could say, more of a sensitive nature, and that he could not bear the separation from Mahaprabhu, and he left. It was the same day or the day after, that much we know, but he could not bear to be separated from Mahaprabhu. And so, Srup Damodar, he was a very important pillar in Mahaprabhu's, congregation. And we hear repeatedly through Chaitanya Charitamrita how, devotees would not go directly to Mahaprabhu generally. They would go to Srup Damodar. And then Srup Damodar would receive them and give them permission on when they can see Mahaprabhu. He might receive their gifts, or like we also hear how devotees would write compositions for Mahaprabhu's pleasure, but Srup Damodar would check them first. It would go through Srup Damodar because Srup Damodar knew if someone wrote something inappropriate, it would be disturbing to Mahaprabhu. So Srup Damodar would check those compositions and tell them if something needed to be changed. And so he had this, very important role. He's always by Mahaprabhu's side. He's referred to as the second form, Dvitiya Kalevara, the second form of Mahaprabhu in some places. So, how important was his place for the devotees of Mahaprabhu? But then he left, he couldn't tolerate the separation. He left. And so Ramananda Rai, Gadadhar Pandit also did not stay that long. Gadadhar Pandit, he's not a leader type. I mean, now we're using like very mundane words. But that's not his nature, to take on a leading role. He's well, I won't call him an introvert because then we're really using ordinary words, but he has a very internal, withdrawn nature, right? Very shy, we can say, very shy. Gurudev used that word, very shy. So, and then Nityananda Prabhu stayed for some time, not so long, I don't think, but some time. But then he was in the Bengal area, right? So Rāmānanda Rāy, he became very important at that time after Mahaprabhu left, and he became an important pillar for the community of Gaudiya Vaishnavas. He had this, strong nature and gave a lot of support. And and there are many interesting points about Rāmānanda Rāy. And we haven't even gotten to the main thing, which is the Rāmānanda Samvad. But one thing that's very interesting, and again highlights like how special his position was, is that he, as we said, right, he is someone who mixed in the world, right? He worked for the government. His family were also, persons who were, well established and involved with society, well to do. And and normally Mahaprabhu would not associate with those kinds of people, right? And we hear how, particularly in the case of the king, right, King Prataparudra, right, Mahaprabhu just refuses to see him because he says, a king means money and women, sense pleasure, and it doesn't look good for a sannyasi like me to be meeting with someone like that. And of course, this is also a lila, right? It's also intensifying the love of Prataparudra. He cannot meet with his beloved Lord. Um, but so repeatedly Mahaprabhu is refusing to meet King Prataparudra, and that's generally, how he carries himself. And that, the society at the time was very strict. I mean, we can't really imagine it. Women could not approach Mahaprabhu directly. They, they could not, if they had some offering, it would be given through a male devotee. They could not have a direct relationship with Mahaprabhu. And so the society was very strict at that time. He would sleep on, a straw mat. Even when Jagadananda Pandit brings him some special sandalwood oil as an offering for massage, Mahaprabhu won't accept that because he says people will criticize me. So, it's a very different time from now. I actually there are still some groups in the Hindu world who follow. I had an experience like that where I visited, there was one Hindu gentleman, this was in London, and I was with Sachi Didi, I believe. He invited me to come visit this temple, and we went, and he was like an old school friend of the main sannyasi there. And so he wanted to bring us to meet him. And so it was like a big room, and like, we were sitting on one side, the sannyasi sitting on the other side. And we had a conversation, but I couldn't speak directly to the sannyasi and he wouldn't look at me, And so I would speak to our friend who brought us, and he would tell him, and then so we had the conversation like that, and he wouldn't look at us, And so I was surprised, I mean, I respect that. I respect that. I mean, I feel would be a little too extreme, for me to follow. And especially in our modern world, but I respect that, and it was an interesting experience because it gave me a flavor of, what society was like. Like that would be normal. That would be pervasive throughout society. And so the society was set up in this very rigid type of way. So normally Mahaprabhu wouldn't meet with someone like Rāmānanda Rāy, but he overlooked all of that, because they had this very deep, profound relationship, then we see that Mahaprabhu did not consider any of those factors in his relationship with Ramananda Rai. And when they have their first meeting, right, in South India, then we see that, Mahaprabhu is bathing in this river, Godavari River, and Ramananda is coming as this royal figure. He has this big entourage around him. He's being carried on a palanquin. He's dressed in these very rich robes, and Mahaprabhu's like poor sannyasi, simple sannyasi. And so it's like this meeting of two completely different worlds. Ramananda just happens to come to that river at the same time as Mahaprabhu. And but when they meet, when they see each other, there's this instant connection, right? There's this instant internal recognition, right, of one another. And they immediately go to embrace one another. They immediately go to embrace one another, and they're fainting in ecstasy. And the group, Ramananda's attendants, I mean, it's like a big group, maybe like 50 or something like that. And they're all shocked. Like, what's going on? Like on both sides, like, why is this renounced sannyasi, showing all this emotion, embracing our, you know, our 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 guardian, or what's the word, our leader here, who's a materialist involved in society. And and how is it that Ramananda Rai, he's so emotional about this sannyasi? They're just completely bewildered, by this. And then finally Mahaprabhu is like starts to observe the environment, and then he checks himself, and they stop. And but it's interesting that you see, because their connection is just so profound, they don't think about he doesn't think about any of these external factors or what society will think. He just can't help himself, because they have that type of deep relationship. And then they have their conversation, which goes on for a few days. And there are different parts to the conversation too. But at coming to the conclusion of the principal conversation discussion that they have, then we really see, who is Ramananda Rai. Because what is the hallmark of the highest devotee? That Krishna cannot hide from them. Krishna cannot hide from them. And so coming to the conclusion of their first discussion, then Ramananda starts to see who is this Mahaprabhu actually, right? And he tells Mahaprabhu, in the beginning, when we were beginning our discussion, I was seeing a sannyasi in front of me, but now I'm seeing this dark form of Shama Sundar and this beautiful golden girl. What is this, right? So, there, thank you very much. And Krishna, very, very nice. Here's an image here. So he sees, what is the ontological position of Mahaprabhu as a combined form of Shri Radha Krishna. And so, and he sees that because of his deep heart, right? Premanjana Chrita Bhakti Vilochanena, right? This is mentioned in Brahma Samhita, right? Those who have eyes anointed with the salve of prema, of love, they're always seeing their Lord, right? Through the eyes of love, they see him. And so because Ramananda Rai is this type of a devotee, has such a deep heart, then Mahaprabhu cannot hide from him. And Ramananda cannot but see who he really is. And at first, Mahaprabhu's kind of playing with him a little bit. And, oh, yes, Ramananda, I know what's going on. You're one of those great devotees. You see Krishna everywhere. This is the nature of the Mahabhagavat. Everywhere they look, they see Krishna. So you're seeing Krishna here. And Ramananda said, oh no, please don't play with me. Don't tease me like this, my Lord. Don't tease me like this. And another thing which we must mention here is that it is this vision that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur established in his temples, and which Srila Sridhar Maharaj and Srila Govinda Maharaj, they carried forward, into Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Math. So that, because that worship was new, right? What's been established in the Gaudiya Math, the worship of Radha, Krishna, Mahaprabhu together, that's something that was started by Saraswati Thakur. But what is that? What is that worship? That is the vision of Rāmānanda Rāy, right? So from one perspective, we can say that Saraswati Thakur established the worship of what was revealed in the heart of Rāmānanda Rāy. Right. And so they have this discussion, right? And it's, we have to have some mention of it. I don't know if we'll go into a full discussion today because there's so much to be said, but it is a very important discussion and something that was very dear to Srila Sridhar Maharaj, and something that he drew upon in his, in many ways in his style of discourse himself, right? Like for example, the whole concept of gradation that Srila Sridhar Maharaj speaks about a lot, right? That's one of the main themes of the Ramananda Samvad, right? The principle of progress as being elimination and new acceptance, right? That's also coming from Ramananda Samvad. Srila Sridhar Maharaj speaks about, right? Right, because the whole discussion it's developing in this way, right? Starting from a very basic foundational level of God consciousness, and then slowly developing. I had this very, very nice talk with my good friend Isha Bandhu Prabhu a few days ago, and he gave me this very in Australia. He gave me this very nice analogy of because he's a dad, right? So he's raised kids, and so he was explaining to me, like I know about Lego, but then he was telling me about this other thing called Duplo. Maybe some of you know Duplo. You know? Yeah, okay. I guess I was the only one who didn't know. So like Duplo is kind of like before you get to Lego. Like Lego's more advanced, right? So before there's Duplo, which has like bigger pieces, right? So the kids can't like choke on it when they're very young. And then, but then even before that, then he sent me a link um, to this other thing that they have, and basically you just match shapes. So you have this like stand, and it's like very basic. You're just matching square into the square, you know, gap, and then triangle into the triangle, rectangle into the and so we were discussing like these different levels in the development of our understanding, right? And I just thought it was a brilliant analogy. And so like, we're like all like in the Duplo stage, like we're like a very basic stage. Haven't quite graduated to Lego yet. And then there was another one beyond Lego. Maybe some of you know he mentioned, I don't remember. Um, but so the Ramananda Sambad's like kind of developing like that, that starting from a very basic level, and and initially Mahaprabhu's rejecting, right? Elimination, new acceptance. And so Mahaprabhu begins the conversation, Pada Shlok Sadhya Nirnoy. Tell me a shloka to establish what is the goal of life, right? And Lego Technic. Yeah. That's what he said. Yeah, that was it. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. Lego Technic. I don't even know what that is, but yeah. Yeah, that was it. Yeah. Lego Technic. Um, so so the conversation developing like this, right? And in the beginning, Mahaprabhu's rejecting. Eho Baya. Oh, there's someone. I think it's a delivery man. I'll just ignore it. Um, so sorry. So Padashlok Sadir Nirnoy. Tell me tell me what is the goal of life with evidence, basically, is what he's saying. Like give some support, which is an important point, that don't just, we can all, of course, there is a place for our own feeling, our own intuition. There's an important place for that. But we also want to verify that from with a reliable source, right? The two should be in consonance with one another, right? So Mahaprabhu states that from the very, like, sets down the ground rules, like, tell me what you think about this, but give me support from the scripture, from the Shastra. And so then Ramananda is presenting one conception. And in the beginning, Mahaprabhu is rejecting Eho Baya, Age Kaha. This is external. You know, go ahead. Tell me something more. Go deeper. Go deeper. Tell me something more. And then Ramananda is presenting another conception. Again, Mahaprabhu is dismissing it. Eho Baya, Age Kaha. External. Go deep, right? And we can just have like a short summary, right? The Varnashrama Dharma is the first thing that Ramananda presents, um, where it's, kind of more that we are in the center, actually. And that's kind of how we can, in my thinking about this conversation, I feel like this is really this is what separates, um, like, what's the preliminary phase, we could say, before you really get to the real game. And then how does it change when you really enter the game, right? So the preliminary phase of your life of religion is approaching God, is where it's more about you, like, oh God, you take care of me. Oh God, I love you because you take care of me. It's more about me, right? So you're living your life in this world, and God is someone on the circumference who supplies everything to you, right? But you're in the center. And then, we can remember the English word Lord. It comes from, I don't remember if it's Latin or German, but it comes from loaf, bread. Like God, so this whole concept of God who gives us our bread, God who that's like really tied in with the concept of our relationship with God and who God is, right? So that's like, preliminary phase, we could say. Uh, right. So first is Varnashrama Dharma, and then there's, where, it's your God is kind of like, oh, I think we have, okay. Um, okay. God's kind of like remote, hazy figure. You're living your life in a regulated, honorable way and remembering to offer something to God sometimes. Um, and right, then there's Karma Mishra Bhakti, where there's more of a direct focus on offering to God, right, and serving God. But it's also very mixed with one's own desires, right, for worldly gain in various ways, right? I like pizza. I'm gonna make pizza for Krishna in a very simplistic sense, right? Um, and then there's Jnana Mishra, where it's like in the mood of pure devotion, what does Krishna want? I'll make that and offer that, right? So obviously, Karma Mishra Bhakti is a great thing, but there's more, right? That's a beginner. That's a beginning, right? It's a beginning. Then there's Jnana Mishra Bhakti, right? Devotion that is mixed with tendency for Germaic. Okay, thank you, Vishabhanvi. I was thinking that too, but then I thought I doubted myself. So okay, great, awesome. Um, so right, so then Jnana Mishra Bhakti is where there is that approach to God, but it's also mixed with inclination for renunciation, liberation, right? So they're like two sides of the same coin, actually, because in Karma Mishra Bhakti, we want worldly gain. Then in Jnana Mishra Bhakti, you want spiritual gain, which again is a good thing, but it's still a beginning, right? And it does not represent our inherent nature as givers and lovers of God, right? The mood, the full, wholesale spirit of dedication, right? That's not represented there. So that's like in a very condensed form, right? That first part of the conversation. And then they get to the turning point, right? So up to there, Mahaprabhu was saying, Eho Bhaya. Ramananda is giving verses from the scriptures to support what he's saying. Mahaprabhu was rejecting still. Then they get to the turning point, and that's the Gyane Prayasham verse, important verse spoken by Lord Brahma in Bhagavatam. Yane Prayasham Udapasyanamanta Eva, right? Jivanti Sammukaditam Bhavadiya Vartam. Stanesti to Shutikatam Tanuvan Manobir Ye Prayaso Jitatito Piyasitais Trilokyam. And so begins with this point of giving up any type of calculation. So giving up the attempt for gyan is what it says, knowledge. But that can also broadly mean any type of calculative approach to the Lord, whether it's material or spiritual, to give that all up, right? And also mentions taking shelter of the devotee, hearing Krishna saying in this verse, oh, wait, sorry, it's spoken by Lord Brahma, isn't it? So saying that one who approaches the Lord through his devotees and mentions hearing the messages about the Lord spoken by his devotees and surrendering to those messages. That is also mentioned there. And so approaching the Lord, in a mood of full surrender, right? Wanting to surrender to his will and through his devotees, right? And one who can do that, one who can approach the Lord with that type of surrender, they can actually conquer the Lord. That is what is it's almost like a paradox. If you fully surrender to the Lord, he will also surrender to you, right? So Jito, who is Ajita, right? Who is normally unconquerable. Ajita Krishna, Krishna who's unconquerable, he will become Jita Krishna. He will become conquered by the devotion of such a devotee. And so then at this point, then Mahaprabhu accepts. Eho hoy, age kahar. This is okay, he says. So literally, the Bengali just means like, this is. Eho hoy, like this is. Now go further, like develop on that. So this is like established as like the pass. Gurudev, he describes it as like the passing mark. Like it's a pass here. But you can also do better, right? So so then he goes deeper into this book. This is now like kind of established as the foundation of a real relationship with the Lord. And then Ramananda develops upon that, going into the different rasas, right? Going into the different relationships with the Lord, right? Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, Madhur. So the passive relationship, servitor, friend, guardian, and lover, ultimately. Then Ramananda is going through all of that, and Mahaprabhu is very happy, and then he goes like really deep. He's going into detail about Krishna, Radharani, very, high, elevated points, and they've gone super high, but Mahaprabhu is still not satisfied. And when Ramanand is finished, then Mahaprabhu tells him, I think you can tell me something more. Ramanand is like, what? I've just gone into like the deepest, point that I know of, that I could possibly speak upon. Like, what more is there? And Mahaprabhu, pushes him, and then Ramananda says, okay. He says, previously everything I was telling to you, I was giving some scriptural verification, right? I was citing some evidence from the Shastra. And he says, but now I'm getting some inspiration into my heart, um, of something even deeper. But I can't cite any scriptural evidence for that, right? Praman, right? That's the word that's used sometimes. Praman, like evidence, scriptural evidence. I can't give any source from the scripture. Um, I just wrote a PhD thesis. What more could you want? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Something like that. um, so then Ramananda is like, well, there's something else that's coming to mind, but I can't give you any source, for that. So Mahaprabhu is like, yes, please tell me. And so then Ramananda tells his own composition, the song, which is recorded in Chaitanya Charitamrita. And it's very esoteric, it's very abstract, but he's like describing this point in the relationship between Radha and Krishna where they're separated, and their feelings of separation become so intense that they become united again. Something like this, you know. Um, and I don't want to misrepresent. I don't want to say too much, but what he is essentially saying is indicating Mahaprabhu, right? Indicating this union of Radha and Krishna, um, and coming as Mahaprabhu, right? He's indicating that in his poetry. This this is the ultimate, um, manifestation of the absolute truth, right? Radha, Krishna combined in one as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he's indicating this in this kind of abstract way in his poem, and Mahaprabhu can understand, right? So he actually goes and covers his mouth. So like he's been found out, So he's like, no more, no more. Like you can't say anything more. Cat's out of the bag. Srila Sridhar Maharaj used that expression. Cat's out of the bag now. And there's something similar also happens with Sanatan, right? When Mahaprabhu is giving instruction to Sanatan and Goswami, and then Sanatan's mentioning, like trying to like expose Mahaprabhu as the Supreme Lord, and Sanatan's mentioning the descriptions of the avatar for Kali Yuga, right? Which of course match Mahaprabhu. And Sanata's being a little tricky, like trying to expose Mahaprabhu. Mahaprabhu's like, hey. So yes, this is the heart of Ramananda Rai. And that vision that was revealed to Ramananda in a way that we haven't heard was revealed to anyone else. So he has this very unique place in the pastimes of Mahaprabhu and unique relationship with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So that is Ramananda Rai. Well, we've just come to the end of our time. Does anyone want to add anything else? Bring anything up before we close for today? And I'm sure there's so much more we could say about Ramananda. That's all that I'm thinking of now.
Dandavat Vichaka, Dandavat.
Dandavad, Bimal Krishna Prabhu.
Give my interruption here. Sorry, I'm kind of out with had a back injury for a while, so I'm not like presentable. But anyway,
Oh,
happy to be here with you all, regardless. But I just wanted to share that, which I'm sure you're all aware, or I'm not sure what verse you're on in the Sri Upadesh Amrita class, but in verse 10, Srila Guru Maharaj gives a really beautiful explanation of the Ramananda Samvad. It's on page 254. He starts, but anyway,
oh,
it's really beautiful. He gives, because I know it's in a few different books from Guru Maharaj, but in this one too, it seems slightly different, but it's also very beautiful for anyone who's interested in kind of diving in deeper or diving in, I guess, at all. But he also, in that same verse 10, he also kind of speaks about the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, like he kind of gives explanation of that as well. But anyway, it's really beautiful for anyone interested that just wants to read more into it. But I was thinking back to, I actually went to the Godavari, the temple there at the Godavari River, and
really?
yes, back like it's been probably 20 years. I think I had just started practicing Krishna consciousness. Like, I mean, not like I'm still practicing Krishna consciousness or trying anyway, attempting, but I was with ISKCON at the time, or kind of an ISKCON associated temple, and it always makes me realize, because I was there, but I didn't understand the importance of the place necessarily, or the significance of it. Like I knew that Mahaprabhu was there, but I didn't really know about the Ramananda Samvad. And it was like it was a different temple. I think it's a Gaudiya temple, but then also I didn't learn until later on that Srila Guru Maharaj established that temple there,
Mm,
which
mm,
that was I mean, I don't want to say this in a disrespectful way, and I hope you know what I mean, but that almost had more significance to me later on than the actual place itself. Like,
mm,
from my own
mm,
understanding, you know what I'm saying? Because I don't have the capacity, but it just also shows how important it is to, um, that we can serve a devotee, and that we go to these holy places with a devotee who can help us understand the significance of these places, and so that we can have the proper respect and understanding. But anyway, those are just a few thoughts that I had. But I'm really happy to be here and to hear from you, and I always appreciate your sharing. And I even if I'm not here in person, I'm always watching the videos afterwards on YouTube, and I appreciate all of your seva and your hard work. So my dandavats to you all.
oh. Wow, well that you've just brought up some really, really important points, which yeah, I completely overlooked. But let's actually go through that. We kind of ran out of time with Upadeshamrita because we have this new schedule now, and it's just difficult with the Europe, Asia, the Americas. So we kind of did a rush of concluding Upadeshamrita. We didn't go through those last commentaries. So maybe next week we can go through that section Bhima Prabhu was mentioning in verse 10. Um, where Srila Sridhar Maharaj is discussing the Rāmānanda Samvad. That would be very nice. And yes, and you've brought up some very important points. You know, that it was Srila Sridhar Maharaj who revealed that place where the Rāmānanda Samvad took place, and also at that time, Srila Saraswati Thakur changed Srila Sridhar Maharaj's name to Rāmānanda Das. He was previously Ramendra Sundar, if I'm not mistaken. He was Ramendra Chandra, I think, at birth, and then Srila Saraswati Thakur changed his name to Ramendra Sundar when he took initiation. But then when he sent him to discover the place of the Rāmānanda Samvad, he changed his name to Rāmānanda Das. And that was something that Srila Sridhar Maharaj held very close in his heart. And you see in several of Srila Sridhar Maharaj's writings, he actually signs his name as Ramananda Das, or refers to himself as Ramananda Das. And you see that in the Premadhamma Deva Stotram, and also in Sharanagati, Lagu Chandrika Bhasya, Srila Sridhar Maharaj's commentary on Sharanagati, he refers to himself as Ramananda Das. And that was when he had already taken sannyas, and he already had his new name of Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar, but he still identified with that. And our Gurudev in Russia, he once, on the appearance day of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he gave a whole talk about Rāmānanda Rāy. And then at the end, he was saying, you may be asking me, why am I talking about Rāmānanda Rāy? It's Guru Maharaj's appearance day. And he said, that is because Guru Maharaj's identity is non-different from Rāmānanda Rāy. He said that, you know. So there was some very deep connection there. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj had very deep affinity for Rāmānanda Rāy. Something very esoteric we cannot properly understand. So as Bimal Prabhu says, you know, that actually makes this all feel a lot closer to us, right? That Ramananda, you know, Ramananda Rāy is, you know, we may think, oh, he's very distant figure, you know, associate of Mahaprabhu. But no, our own Param Guru Maharaj, you know, he had this type of connection with Ramananda. He discovered that place, right, where the conversation took place, and it makes it all feel much closer to us, right? So we are very blessed to have that connection with Srila Govinda Maharaj and Srila Sridhar Maharaj. So thank you so much, Bimal Prabhu, for bringing up those points. And we hope your back is better. Okay, well, should we close there for today? It looks like Ananda's already planning out next week. Got the page. Great. All right. Thank you all so much for your good company. So grateful to have that. Jai Shri Bhakti Sundar Govinda Dev Goswami Maharaj ki Jai, Shri Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami Maharaj ki Jai, Jai Shri Ramananda Rai ki Jai, all the assembled devotees ki Jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki Jai, Nitai Gaur Premanande, Hari Bol. See you all.
Ki Jai.
Jai Gurudev.
Thank you, Shakadvi. Thank you, everybody.